The morning fog clung to the streets of downtown Chicago like a reluctant ghost when Elena Vasquez arrived at the Hartwell Tower at 5:45 in the morning. She balanced a canvas tote bag over one shoulder and held the small, sleep-warm hand of her 3-year-old daughter, Marisol, in the other. Marisol had her mother's dark curls and her late father's stubborn eyes, and she dragged a worn stuffed elephant named Peanut behind her on the polished lobby floor with absolute zero apology. Elena was 28 years old and had been cleaning the penthouse suite of this tower for 14 months. She'd taken the early shift, 5:45 a.m. to noon, because it let her pick Marisol up from the neighbor's apartment before lunchtime. The neighbor, Mrs. Kowalski, charged $30 a session, and Elena calculated every dollar like a chess master calculating moves. The building's regular staff had long since briefed Elena on the occupant of the penthouse, Mr. Dominic Hartwell, age 33, founder and CEO of Hartwell Dynamics, a man whose net worth had been estimated by Forbes at somewhere north of $4 billion. A man who had, in the last 8 months, become something of a ghost himself. He doesn't come out, Terrence from maintenance had told her on her first week. Not really. Groceries go in. He doesn't come out. You clean when he's in his office. He won't bother you and you don't bother him. He'd paused. Don't make eye contact. Don't ask questions. Just clean and go. Elena had nodded and done exactly that. She'd cleaned around the man like he was a piece of expensive furniture, present, awkward, ignored by mutual agreement. He wore the same dark sweatpants and faded MIT hoodie day after day. His hair had grown past his collar. His jaw wore weeks of beard rather than days. And the smell, not unwashed exactly, but stale, like air that hadn't circulated in too long, like a room whose windows had been sealed shut against the world. The other building staff talked about him in hushed, speculative tones in the service elevator. Used to be in every magazine, said Priya from reception. GQ, Forbes, Time. Gave speeches. Ran marathons. Now look at him. There was pity in her voice, but also something else, the faint, uncomfortable relief of people who were glad the tragedy wasn't theirs. Elena didn't gossip. She didn't have time for it, and she didn't have the heart for it either. She'd known grief from the inside. Her husband Marco had been killed in a construction accident when Marisol was only 4 months old, and she knew that grief didn't look dramatic. It looked like sweatpants. It looked like sealed windows. It looked like a man sitting in a $4 billion apartment who couldn't find a reason to shower. On this particular Tuesday, Marisol was with her because Mrs. Kowalski had a doctor's appointment. Elena had gotten special permission from building management, reluctant, conditional, barely granted permission, to bring her daughter along just this once. She'd promised Marisol would be quiet and good, and Marisol, who was 3 and therefore constitutionally incapable of promises she could keep, had nodded very seriously. The elevator rose. Marisol watched the floor numbers tick upward with the focused intensity of a scientist monitoring an experiment. Peanut the elephant dangled from her fist. "Mama," she said, when the elevator reached 47 and slowed. "Who lives up here?" "A man who needs his floors cleaned," Elena said. "Is he nice?" Elena considered this carefully. "I don't know, baby. I've never really talked to him." Marisol absorbed this, with the gravity of a philosopher. The doors opened. The penthouse spread before them. Vast, expensive, cold with the particular coldness of spaces that had forgotten how to be homes. And somewhere in the shadows beyond the kitchen, behind a half-closed door, a light burned. Elena tightened her grip on Marisol's hand and stepped inside. She didn't know it then, but everything, absolutely everything, was about to change. Dominic Hartwell had not always been the kind of man you avoided looking at directly. There had been a time, Not so long ago that he couldn't remember it, but long enough that it felt like a film he'd once watched about someone else's life, when he had been electric, magnetic. The kind of man who walked into a room and made it rearrange itself around him. He'd built his first algorithm at 16. Founded his first company at 21. Sold it for $90 million at 25. Hartwell Dynamics, his current company, had revolutionized climate modeling software and was currently being used by 11 governments and 43 university research programs to predict and respond to environmental crises. He'd been called a visionary, a genius. One profile had called him the most important 30-year-old alive. Then came the accident. 18 months ago, his younger sister Claire, 26, a pediatric nurse, the one person who could make him laugh until he couldn't breathe, had been killed by a drunk driver on the I-90 on a Wednesday afternoon in November. She'd been on her way to surprise him for his birthday. She'd had a cake in the back seat. Lemon, his favorite. Dominic had been told about the cake by the police officer who came to his door. He didn't know why they'd included that detail. Maybe they thought it would help. It had not helped. It had, in fact, broken something in him so precisely that he wasn't sure the pieces were the right shape to fit back together. He'd gone through the motions for 3 months, attended the funeral, returned to the office, sat in meetings, signed documents. He'd fooled almost everyone. Then one morning in February, he'd woken up, looked at his calendar, and simply couldn't. Couldn't get up. Couldn't care. Couldn't perform the elaborate theater of being Dominic Hartwell, visionary and genius, and most important 30-year-old, when the only person who'd ever loved him without caring about any of that was dead. His COO, James, handled the company. His lawyers handled his affairs. His housekeeper, the previous one, before she'd left for another position, had kept the penthouse functional. Now Elena came, and he was dimly aware of her presence, the quiet competence of her movements, the way she cleaned around his life like a river routing itself around a stone. He didn't speak to her. He barely looked at her. Not because he was cruel, or at least he didn't think cruelty was what was left of him, but because speaking required the manufacture of words, and words required the infrastructure of a self, and his self had been, for 18 months, largely offline. He spent most of his time in his study. Not working or not much. Mostly sitting. Reading sometimes. Staring at the lakefront view, which was beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when you can no longer feel beauty, like seeing a painting through glass. He knew he smelled. He knew his hair was too long. He knew the staff talked. He had heard Priya once in the lobby saying his name in that tone. He had stood in the elevator for 22 seconds after the doors opened, unable to make himself care enough to be ashamed. On this Tuesday morning, he was sitting in his usual chair by the study window when he heard the elevator arrive. He heard Elena's quiet, efficient footsteps. He'd learned their rhythm without meaning to. And then he heard something he had not heard in this apartment in a very long time. A child's voice. Small and clear and entirely unimpressed by its surroundings. "Mama, it smells funny in here." A long pause. Then, in a low, mortified whisper, "Marisol." "Sho." Like old socks and sad. "Marisol. And maybe cheese." Dominic sat very still. Something moved in his chest. Not pain, exactly, and not quite amusement, but something in the neighborhood of both. Something that felt, distantly, like being alive. He stayed very still and listened to the small stranger move through his apartment, narrating the world to her elephant in a running commentary that asked for no permission and offered no apology. And for the first time in 8 months, Dominic Hartwell paid attention to something other than his own grief. Elena moved through the penthouse kitchen with the swift, practiced economy of someone who has learned to be invisible. She wiped the counters, loaded the dishwasher with a single mug and bowl from the previous day, swept the floor. Marisol sat at the kitchen island on the high stool Elena had positioned for her, supplied with a juice box and 3 picture books and peanut, and for approximately 11 minutes, this arrangement worked beautifully. Then Marisol climbed down. Elena heard the small thump of sneakers on marble and turned around. "Baby, stay on the stool." But Marisol was already gone, toddling with the determined purposefulness of a child who has spotted something interesting. Elena followed quickly, whispering her daughter's name like a prayer. She found her in the hallway outside the study. The door was ajar. It was always ajar because she had to clean in there eventually, and Marisol was standing in the doorway, feet planted, head tilted, staring at the man in the chair. Dominic Hartwell stared back. He looked, Elena thought with a lurch of guilt, much worse up close than he did in her peripheral vision. His face was thin, too thin, sharper than it should have been at 33. His eyes were gray and intelligent but dimmed, like excellent lamps with low batteries. He hadn't shaved in weeks. He hadn't done much of anything in weeks. "Marisol," Elena said softly. "Come here, sweetheart. We don't go in there." Marisol did not come. She pointed at Dominic with the blunt directness of a 3-year-old and said, "You look like my Uncle Raimundo when his dog died." Silence. Elena closed her eyes briefly. "I am so sorry, Mr. Hartwell. She doesn't have a filter yet." "How did your Uncle Raimundo feel?" Dominic asked. The question surprised them both. Elena suspected. She saw it flicker across his face, a small wondering at himself. But he was looking at Marisol, and Marisol took the question with the seriousness it apparently deserved.
"Very sad," she said.
"And he didn't eat his dinner. Mama made him eat soup. Did the soup help?" Marisol considered this, with tremendous gravity. "A little bit," she said. "He cried in the soup, though." Something moved across Dominic's face. Elena couldn't name it. It was too complex, too layered with things she hadn't been invited to know. "Do you want to hold Peanut?" Marisol asked. She held up the elephant. "He helps." Elena held her breath. The moment was so strange and tender that she felt the intrusion of it, the way her daughter had walked straight through every wall this man had built, simply because she didn't know the walls were there. Dominic looked at the elephant. Then, slowly, he reached out and took it. He held it carefully, like something breakable, like something borrowed.
"Thank you," he said.
His voice was rough from disuse, the words unpracticed. "You're welcome," said Marisol. "His name is Peanut. He has a tummy ache sometimes, but he is very brave." Elena stood in the doorway and watched her daughter talk to a billionaire who hadn't spoken to another human being with any real presence in longer than she could guess. Watched the man's hands loosen around the stuffed elephant. Watched something, the faintest, most tentative thing, move behind those dimmed gray eyes. She didn't rush Marisol away. She stood there, quiet as a doorframe, and let the strange, unlikely grace of it happen. She didn't know it was the calm before everything changed. It happened on a Thursday, 3 weeks after the morning with Peanut. Elena had arrived for her regular shift, Marisol in tow again. Mrs. Kowalski had a standing Thursday class at the senior center now, and the new arrangement had been quietly, wordlessly permitted by Dominic Hartwell without any formal conversation, in the way that some things between people become understood without being spoken. Marisol had graduated from the kitchen stool to the large sitting room sofa, where she conducted elaborate diplomatic meetings between Peanut and a set of small plastic animals she brought in her backpack. Occasionally, she would toddle to the study door and deliver brief, unprompted updates to Dominic, who had taken to leaving the door fully open. Peanut won the game, she might announce. "Good," he would say. He cheated a little. Everyone does. These were, Elena reflected, possibly the most honest conversations happening in any billion-dollar building in Chicago. On this Thursday, Elena was cleaning the master bathroom, a room she worked quickly through because it held the evidence of a man not fully taking care of himself, when she heard Marisol's voice change. Not volume.
Tone.
The particular tone of a child who has noticed something wrong. Mister, you're shaking. Elena dropped her cloth and moved. She found them in the study. Dominic was still in his chair, but he was leaning forward now, one hand braced on the desk, the other pressed flat to his chest. His face had gone a terrible color, gray-white, like old paper. Sweat beaded at his temple. His breathing was shallow and labored, each inhale a visible effort. Marisol was standing beside his chair, her small hand resting on his arm with perfect instinctive comfort, the way children touch when they don't yet know to be afraid. Her eyes were large and solemn. "He's not right, Mama," she said simply. Elena crossed the room in 3 steps. "Mr. Hartwell. Dominic." She used his name without thinking. "Look at me. Are you having chest pain?" He looked at her. His eyes were alert but frightened, and there was something else in them, something she recognized. The expression of a person who hasn't been looked at directly in so long that the experience of being seen is its own kind of shock.
"Pressure," he said.
"Since this morning. I thought it was—" He stopped. Breathed. "I thought it would pass." "How long this morning?" "Since about 4.
4.
It was now almost 8. Elena's medical training was limited to the first aid certification required by her cleaning agency, but she knew this. You do not have chest pressure for 4 hours at 33 and wait for it to pass. "I'm calling 911, she said. "It's probably—" "I'm calling 911, she said again, already pulling out her phone. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not, quite, but she kept them moving. Marisol, who had never once in her short life been to an emergency room but had watched enough of her mother's calm in hard moments to understand what it required, climbed up onto the footstool beside Dominic's chair. She put Peanut on his knee. "It's okay," she said, with complete 3-year-old authority. "Peanut's brave. He'll stay with you." Dominic Hartwell, for $1 billion and 33 years old, looked at the stuffed elephant on his knee, and Elena watched something cross his face that she had no word for, something cracked open and soft underneath, like the inside of something that has been closed too long. "Thank you," he said to Marisol, and then, to Elena, in a voice that was humbled by the fear in it. "Thank you." The ambulance was there in 6 minutes. Elena rode with him. She didn't plan to. It simply happened, the way urgent things happen, without the luxury of deliberation. She buckled Marisol into the jump seat and held Dominic's hand and talked to him in the calm, low voice she'd learned from her own mother during hard nights, and Marisol held Peanut out toward him every few minutes like a small, earnest offering. In the elevator, in the lobby, on the sidewalk where the staff had gathered with wide, uncertain eyes, not one of them had known, not one of them had gone up to check. Marisol walked beside the gurney with her hand near Dominic's arm, not quite touching, a small sentinel. The paramedic later told Elena that they'd arrived just in time. Another hour, possibly less. Another hour, and the most important thing that had happened to Dominic Hartwell in 18 months would have been the thing that ended him. The diagnosis was a myocardial infarction, a heart attack, partially obstructed, caught before it became complete. The cardiologist, a precise woman named Dr. Farida Rosé, explained it to Elena in the hallway outside the cardiac unit because Dominic had asked her to, because he had no one else. That fact, the starkness of it, sat in Elena's chest like a weight. He had a COO who sent James to the hospital within 40 minutes. He had lawyers. He had assistants and an entire administrative apparatus built to run his life in his absence. What he did not have, it turned out, was anyone who would sit in a hospital waiting room because they wanted to. Elena sat there for 3 hours. Marisol fell asleep across her lap, Peanut tucked under her chin, and Elena sat in the plastic chair and watched the cardiac unit doors and tried to unknot the feeling in her chest. She had no particular obligation here. She was the cleaning woman. She'd called the ambulance and ridden along and done the right thing, and now she could go home, and it would be enough. More than enough. It would be the exact right amount. She stayed. When they let her in to see him, because she was listed in the confusion and the kindness of overwhelmed nurses as family friend, he was propped up against pillows, chest monitored, color returning slowly to his face. He looked diminished in the hospital gown. Also, somehow, more real than she had ever seen him. "You stayed," he said. "Marisol wanted to make sure you were okay," Elena said. Which was true. It was also incomplete. He looked at her with those gray eyes, clearer now than she had ever seen them in 14 months of cleaning around him. "I've been he stopped. Started again. "I've been absent. From my own life. I think I knew that. I didn't know how to," he stopped again. "You don't have to explain anything to me," Elena said. "I know." A pause. "I want to. I haven't wanted to talk to anyone in, I don't know how long." He looked at his hands on the blanket. "My sister died. 1.5 years ago.
Claire.
She was the best person I knew. She was going to surprise me. Birthday cake. Lemon." He said it like he'd said it before, alone in the dark. Like he'd been saying it to himself in the dark for a very long time. "I'm so sorry," Elena said. The words were small, she knew. They were always small. But she had learned that small words, offered truly, are not nothing. She would have liked Marisol, he said. Claire loved kids. She was a pediatric nurse. A ghost of something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, but its ancestor. She would have had an opinion about Peanut. Marisol would have told her it was non-negotiable, Elena said. That ghost of a smile moved a little closer to the surface. She sounds like Claire. Marisol chose this moment to wake up, sit upright, and announce, "I'm hungry, Mama." Then she saw Dominic and brightened with the uncomplicated joy of 3-year-olds who have not yet learned to modulate their relief at good outcomes.
"You're not dead," she said.
Marisol. Elena began. "No," Dominic said, and this time the smile broke the surface, real and ragged and fragile as a thing that's been underground a long time and is only now feeling the light. "No, I'm not dead. I'm not dead at all." He reached out his hand. Marisol placed Peanut in it without being asked, because she understood, in whatever wordless way children understand the things that matter, that it was what was needed. Elena watched the man hold the small stuffed elephant and cry, quietly, without theater, the way grown men cry when they've held it for too long, and she did not look away, because looking away would have been a kindness he didn't need. He needed to be seen. He needed to be in a room with someone who didn't need him to be anything other than what he was, 33 years old and broken open and finally beginning to heal. Spring came to Chicago the way it always does, reluctantly at first, then all at once, as if it had been holding its breath and finally let go. The lake turned from iron gray to blue. The trees along Michigan Avenue furred with green. And on the 47th floor of Hartwell Tower, the windows opened for the first time in 18 months. The change in Dominic Hartwell was not dramatic in the way of movie transformations. There was no montage. There was, instead, the quiet accumulation of small things: a haircut in early March, a real meal, prepared by an actual chef he'd finally agreed to hire, eaten at the table instead of over the kitchen sink. Meetings resumed, at first by video, then in person, his team visibly relieved and trying not to show how relieved they were. A therapy appointment, then another, then a third. And every Tuesday and Thursday morning, Elena came with Marisol, and Marisol conducted the ongoing business of being Marisol. The diplomatic summits between plastic animals, the unsolicited assessments of Dominic's appearance. Your hair is nice today. Before it was like a bird lived in it. The updates on Peanut's emotional landscape, and something in the penthouse breathed again. Elena noticed the changes the way she noticed everything about the apartment. Carefully, quietly, without making a show of it. A framed photograph appeared on the desk. A young woman with Dominic's eyes and a brighter version of his smile, laughing at something off camera. Elena cleaned around it gently, the way you clean around something sacred. One morning in April, she found a lemon cake on the kitchen counter. Just sitting there, in a white bakery box, with a small handwritten card that said, "For Claire," and "Happy birthday to me." Elena straightened the box slightly and went on with her work and did not cry until she was in the service elevator going down. What happened next was something she had not planned for and would not have believed if someone had told her it was coming. Dominic asked her, one morning in May, if she would sit down. Not as an instruction, more as an uncertain request from a man who was still relearning how to ask for things. He'd made coffee, actual coffee in an actual coffee maker, and he'd made a small cup of hot chocolate for Marisol, and he'd set them on the table like someone who had looked up how to do this and was trying very hard. He told her about the Hartwell Foundation, Claire's idea, originally a nonprofit focused on mental health resources for working families. He'd set it up 18 months ago, right after she died, and then done almost nothing with it because he'd done almost nothing with anything. He wanted to actually build it now. He wanted it to be real. He looked at his coffee cup. I was going to hire someone to run the operations. Administrative director. He looked up. You are more competent than anyone who has worked for me in the last year. You keep a budget in your head. I can see you running when you talk. You organized this whole building's cleaning rotation when the supervisor quit last fall. Terrence told me. Elena stared at him. I clean your apartment. You also saved my life. And you're the only person in the last year and a half who treated me like a person instead of a problem or an asset. He paused. Marisol helped with that. She didn't give me the option of being anything else. Marisol, who was on the sofa with Peanut and did not look up, said, You're welcome. Elena looked at her daughter. She thought about Marco, who had believed she could do anything and had been killed before he got to watch her prove it. She thought about 14 months of 5:45 a.m. and $30 sessions with Mrs. Kowalski and calculating every dollar like a chess move. She thought about what it means to be seen, really seen by someone who knows how to look. She said yes. The Hartwell Foundation for Family Mental Health opened its Chicago offices 6 months later. Its administrative director was Elena Vasquez, 28, who wore her hair up and her mother's pearl earrings and who, in her first staff meeting, brought her daughter because it was the summer and the sitter had canceled, and Marisol sat in the corner with Peanut and said nothing inappropriate for a full 40 minutes, which was a personal record. On the wall of Elena's office, beside her desk, there was a framed photograph she had taken herself. Dominic Hartwell on a Tuesday morning in early spring, sitting on the sitting room floor across from Marisol, both of them deeply engaged in the outcome of a negotiation between Peanut the elephant and a small plastic giraffe. He was laughing. His windows were open. Light was coming in. It was the first photograph she'd ever taken in that apartment. She'd taken it because she'd looked up from the kitchen and seen something she didn't want to forget. A man coming back to life, and her daughter showing him the way, and the whole ordinary, extraordinary miracle of two broken things finding each other in the same room and deciding, without any plan or fanfare, to help each other heal. Dominic saw the photo on her wall the first time he came to see the new office. He stood in front of it for a long moment and didn't say anything. Then he said, "I don't look like that." "Like what?" Elena asked. "Like someone who's going to be okay." She looked at the photo. She looked at him. This man who had opened his windows and gotten a haircut and made coffee and built a foundation for his sister, and was standing in a room full of people working to make the world a little less alone, because a 3-year-old with a stuffed elephant had walked through his door and refused to treat him like a ghost. "I think you do," she said. "I think that's exactly what that looks like." He looked at the photo for another long moment. Then he nodded, just once, and turned to meet his new team. Marisol, seated in the corner, held Peanut up to show him the room. "See," she told the elephant. "He's okay. I told you." And she was right.
He was.
They all were. Or becoming so, which is, in the end, all any of us can ever really be. Not healed, not fixed, but in the patient, tender, unlikely process of becoming whole.
The end.